ever. Oh, hello, horror hounds. Welcome back to Sheebie Jeebies, the horror podcast by fans, for fans, and about fans. I am your host, Sam Carlson, and oh my god, I don't think I've actually made any new content for this channel for a couple of years. Not the long-form content. I had a couple of videos that were mostly just little reviews here and there since 2020, which is when we did Underwater, which was the last thing I think that we have. But I actually fucking hate it. I don't like talking into a camera and talking about movies. So I prefer to talk about movies with another person. And today, on our show, we have Lorne Dixon. How did you get here?
The internet allows me to not actually have to travel. I could be here from anywhere.
This is true.
But I think what you're asking is, how did I even get in your orbit that we even connected?
I know, that was wild, because, the first time that you ever interacted with me was on a Twitter DM, and I was literally moving into the house. So, back in 2021. But I was, actually, literally moving in. It was, 45 minutes each way to transfer from my old apartment to the house. So that was fun.
So on my channel, Visited by Voices, our channel, but I was at that point having a lot of guests on, and the idea was to get as many people from around the horror sphere to have a place that they could have a long-form conversation. And I was always looking for people out there with very individual or specific viewpoints. And I came across Sheebie Jeebies more or less by accident, just in my trolling to see what was out there. And what I really liked about the show was that it was very honest and real, and that while I didn't agree with everything I heard on the show necessarily, I felt that there was a certain ability to just rap with this person, which is super important to me. Also at that time, I was already kind of searching for a co-host for the show, but it was a kind of like a backseat thing, whereas I'd be like, if I come across someone, that'll be great, but I'm not trolling out, I'm not casting out a net specifically to find a co-host. But I invited you on, you didn't know me from anyone, and we very quickly were just okay and just chatting about everything, really, not just genre. And it was clear to me by the end of the show that I needed to offer you a space on my channel, and that led me to, I don't know how many episodes we've actually done together, but it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot more than you think it is.
I have no idea. For a while, I used to put them on a playlist on my YouTube channel for just Visited by Voices stuff that I was doing, but I lost track of that, so I have no idea. And from there, I kind of got abducted into the community, which is amazing because everybody is fucking rad, and they have so much knowledge about so many different things. So
and I warned you that was going to happen. I remember being like, oh, by the way, you might feel a little bit of like a hostage for a while, because especially at that time, the whole thing is you came on right as COVID was exploding, and lockdowns were really rolling into just an everyday existence. We all thought, seriously, a couple weeks, this thing will be kind of over, right? And it took a lot of people from around the country and even around the globe and brought them very close together based on something that they had in common. But the cool thing about it is, while my channel is still specifically horror, the community itself is about people who start there, but that's so far from where they end. And there's so many interests explored among people who share just one thing in common, but a lot of differences as well. And I think that's really strong and cool. And you coming into that community was a big deal, actually, because there is a sort of resistance. There's no gatekeeping, but there's a resistance to new people, kind of a skepticism. And you burned right through those walls. So that was a big moment. And I think it led to a lot of other people feeling like they would be accepted if they made the pilgrimage. So I think, in a way, you were the canary in the coal mine.
Oh, thank you, I think.
Well, you're still breathing and chirping, so you did it right, I guess.
I'm just a natural asshole, but apparently I'm a likable one enough. So I've made so many really good friends, and it's it's funny because it's like I think you mentioned it before about the whole thing about they're not about the idea of those are just internet friends, but they're not. And I feel like I have so many different connections to people, and it's great. It's like ah,
I remember when I first broached the idea of actually physically getting together with people. This is long before it actually happened. It was something that was thought of as almost impossible. Like, oh, that can't ever really happen, right? And then as COVID was lifting, an opportunity came up, really spur of the moment, and the amount of people who just came together that first year we was just outstanding. It was you could see that people had become too cloistered, were too much separation. That when they really made connections, they wanted to close that gap. They wanted to physically be together, and I think that's something that we have to work on every year, trying to make bigger and bigger. I hope at some point you and I will be in the same physical room, which is a little bit bizarre that it hasn't happened actually. But
yeah. I mean, Chris and I really want to go and meet up with everybody the next time there is a meetup. And that's definitely been on our bucket list. It's it's been difficult the last few years, which is kind of also why Sheeby Jeebies has been on hiatus more or less and not doing any new episodes because my mother got evicted from her trailer back in 2019, and she couldn't afford to pay the rent, and we were running out of money. So she got kicked out of she got evicted from the trailer, and she ended up being homeless for like a day before she had a psychotic break. And then she moved into our apartment, and then she just lived with us until she passed away like a couple months ago. So a lot of this, sort of like my attention was, Sheepy Duties was definitely left by the wayside. And I'm not exactly technologically savvy, but I'm kind of trying to pick it up with streaming. So luckily the internet can make this a little bit more possible now. And having the extra time also definitely does help. So
I think that's a huge issue we just talked about. Actually, the fact that in the past there was no opportunity to do what we do at all. I mean, you could I guess you could audition for some news anchor position or some entertainment journalist, but really the amount of positions out there to get your voice heard was minute in the past, and it's only in the last, I don't know, what, 15 years tops, that this has become a possibility for like people on the street at the street level to have a big enough microphone to be heard by anyone who chooses to hear them. And really, because of the nature of YouTube as a platform, for instance, you're as big as any network ever was when we were growing up. It's just a matter of the democracy of eyes, right? The people can decide what they watch. So it's not saying that you're going to have the necessarily biggest audience in the world, but you could. There's nothing stopping you from.
Yeah, I want to go back to this because I enjoy it, and I don't give a flying French fried titty fuck if it ever makes me money. Because it's also being able to just listen to other people's stories, and also to have people that say they don't have streaming platforms. Well, cool. Do you want to talk about a movie you love or you hate? Anything that evokes any sort of strong emotion? Because I got a place for you. I'll talk to you about it.
Yeah. And that's such a wonderful thing that I think is going to change society ultimately, is the fact that we don't need a television station. We don't need. I mean, there is cost associated to doing this, but it's really very, very minute when you think about it.
Yes.
And it's just it's allowing groupthink to collapse, which I think the natural condition is that I think groupthink requires maintenance to survive. And I think that what this format does is it takes that away. Like, you can't just lean on someone else's opinion if you're actually hearing a bunch of other opinions, many more than you've ever heard. When I was growing up I would read Fangoria and Famous Monsters of Filmland and Monsterland and a few magazines, but there was no television, presence for what I loved. People just talking about the movies. So when you got those very few sources, those sources tended to have opinions, and those opinions became kind of like the common law opinions, right? Everyone kind of shared them unless you went out of your way in a conversation with someone. For years, you'd hear things that were just not true. You'd hear, oh, well, that this film isn't popular. A good example would be Night of the Creeps. Oh, it failed in theaters, so it was not popular. And lo and behold, everyone loves Night of the Creeps, right?
Yeah.
It's a very small minority that don't like that movie. But for years, it didn't appear that way. It was only once we got to be able to interact directly with each other that started to collapse. And now it's 360 in the other direction, whereas you can't, if you were to even broach the subject of that's an unpopular movie, people would look at you like you're out of your mind because there's too much evidence to the contrary. So the groupthink from 1988 is completely dead. And I think that's beautiful. I love when films that people claim everyone hates have their proponents out there.
Oh, yeah.
Even if I'm among those who hate it. I love that there's finally a place for those people to find other people who love what they love.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, with, I guess, this first episode coming back from such a long break, you wanted to do One Dark Night and from 1982. And I had that Daft Punk song stuck in my head. One more time. But I've been doing it with One Dark Night, but I can't think of any other things to rhyme with it, so I can't make like a good song out of it.
No.
I know. So why did you want to do this? Like, why was this your pick?
Well, because it was my first theatrical horror film.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is there's a lot of films that I consider to be kind of like the germ that grew into the tree. But this is a big one, and it's one that I don't think people really talk about that much. It's not an obscurity, but it is far from on anyone's lips when we talk about the great horror films in that period. But for me, this little PG rated, and we'll get back to that in a second. This little PG rated weird ass horror film. It was mind blowing. I'd been to the theater before to see things like Little Orphan Annie, right? The Annie movie. Mm-hmm. I'd seen a few films, but I had never been able to do what I did at home with Psycho as a kid, watching it on a UHF station in a theater. That changed with One Dark Night, and this was a concession because I desperately wanted to see Friday the 13th Part 3.
I mean, fair.
And I was told absolutely not. But my grandmother decided that as a concession there was another horror movie playing, and it was called One Dark Night. And when I asked for that, they said yes because it was rated PG. So it was a big deal to be in that theater at whatever age I was. I mean, I could do the math, and it's not kind. I was born in 1973, so you figure that out. Sitting in that theater, surrounded with people, because people used to go to movies. There's 2 shows a night at the 7 and 9 p.m. So you didn't spread out all the audience through the day. It would have been a weekend night because it wouldn't have been a school night. And it was just one of those moments where I was in disbelief about the whole experience. I'm sitting in a movie theater, with probably a soda, maybe popcorn. I don't remember, but just bigger than life moment. And then the movie happened. And the movie doesn't look like movies I was really used to seeing. It looks a lot cruder, a lot rawer, and it was glorious. That low budget, appeal of it was just I loved it. I knew this was different. I couldn't have put it into words at that age, but I knew this was different than what I was watching on television when ABC premieres the original Halloween. That looks like a movie. This looked a little bit like something else, and it was just a big, big moment for me. Revisiting it was always going to be a dangerous subject, right? And I didn't do for many years. Actually, the VHS was not a very common video store title, and I didn't have cable, so it did play a decent amount on cable, but it didn't play much on regular television, over the air television. Mm-hmm. So for a long time, I didn't even have access to this movie. But when I eventually saw it again in the early 90s, I was terrified because if this didn't hold up, that was a prime memory that would be corrupted. So that was a huge deal to me.
So what was your experience seeing it later on then? You were having that first revisit.
So
do you have an ego death?
no,
Oh, okay.
no. What happened though is that it really contextualized, why it's important to me. I'm not going to claim it is the most brilliant film of its time. I can't go into a long spiel about its brilliant subtext. There's like one idea.
I mean, yes.
But it's the kind of film that's effortless to watch. It doesn't really make any big mistakes. There's some sloppy editing maybe, but there's no big mistakes in the movie. And it stands as kind of its own thing. It's a film that kind of feels like a zombie film, but it's not a zombie film. Kind of feels like a vampire film in a way, but it's not a vampire film. And it kind of feels like, well, a haunting ghost type film, but it's not that either. So it's hard to find an exact comparison of what this thing is. And that really, I think, it was the perfect movie for me to start this journey in theaters with, because it's not pigeonholed. I'm glad it wasn't just a generic slasher. That was the first thing I saw. Not that Friday 3 was necessarily that generic slasher, but I'm glad I started where I started, with a film that kind of didn't know what it was, but in not knowing what it was everything.
Yeah, and it definitely has baby's first horror vibes because there's no blood in this movie.
No.
You've got corpses, and some of them are, they actually are real skeletons. Which I noticed that in the trivia on IMDb, they were actual skeletons. Some of them were imported from India. So is this where your love of Indian film actually started? Is this the origin?
I doubt it, but it's a good thought.
Mm.
Yeah, but no, I mean, this is also a film that, my grandfather went with my grandmother and myself and my sister to see this, and he was a World War II veteran, and he fell asleep promptly as soon as the movie started, and he woke up during the climax of this film, and he had a very strong, very bad reaction to what he woke up to seeing on screen in the context of his memories, which, of course, only adds to the lore for me. But I think it's one of those films that it didn't need to be bloody in order to be gross. And I think that's something we've kind of lost. Another example I'd use is that Poltergeist is sort of a film that is kind of not bloody outside the mirror rip scene, but it's gross. This gross stuff. The tree is gross in Poltergeist. Even one of your favorite films is not really properly horror, but obviously borrows some tropes. Ghostbusters isn't gory, but it can be gross.
Yeah, this is definitely on the it's definitely on the gross side of the scale. It's also very funny because when I started watching this, I immediately got Ghostbusters 2 vibes because of the logic in it. So that's probably a good place to start. But to begin with, we should probably also mention this is directed by Tom McLaughlin, who gave us Jason Lives, and also Sometimes They Come Back.
Right, and it actually was co-written by a Michael Hawes.
Yes.
And the interesting thing there is that, of course, Jason Lives opens with a character named Hawes accompanying Tommy Jarvis. So it's just nice to see people put little Easter eggs just for their friends in the movie.
Yeah, and we get that here in the opening scene because we're looking at the graveyard and we see a couple of tombstones. One says Myers, but with an M-E-Y, as an homage to Michael Myers from Halloween. But then there's the other one next to it says Hawes. Yeah. So yeah, nice little Easter egg. And then later on, during the climax, you actually see an arm bust out of the side of a wall in the mausoleum, and that's fucking Michael Hawes' arm. It's just a manly, beefy arm that comes out of nowhere amid all of the corpses, just for no reason, other than budget constraints. It's
a film that you can see the love of cinema in it, and you can also see all the limitations. The film opens with an armada of ambulances approaching a Philadelphia tenement, and it's so filmic, That
was a beautiful way to really kind of open the movie, even though it's not exactly the opening shot. But I know that the intro was tacked on later on because the coroner van's pulling up to this apartment. that was the opening shot, but it kind of doesn't really make sense. So I'm glad they kind of adjusted that. Because previously we see, oh gosh, Melissa Newman, who plays Olivia in this movie, she's having some sort of that waking nightmare, but she's having these visions of somebody kidnapping a young girl, probably co-ed age, right? Probably college, and then she wakes up screaming, and then we just kind of cut to the next day, and there are like five coroners vans pulling up to this apartment, and I'm thinking, what did they do to her? Did they do like reverse Exodia on her? Okay, you don't know what Exodia is, never mind. It's a Yu-Gi-Oh thing.
I
We
wouldn't.
have to explain this. Okay, you've heard of Yu-Gi-Oh though, right? With the cards.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so there's a thing called Exodia, where if you get all 5 pieces of Exodia, you win the game. Cool. This was like reverse, and I'm thinking, what did they do to her? You need each van for each piece of her, but it turns out there were 6 girls in that apartment.
And that was the thing. Like for me, like the idea that you need so many vans pulling up is already like just ominous as hell. But then you get inside and like there's forks hanging out of walls, and you're not okay. You're like the missing information brilliantly adds to a sense of danger, and it's clear that the physical danger may be over, but there's still this palpable sense of no, something's wrong. Something is wrong here, babe, and it's one of those moments that I think again you see the love of film there because that feels like something out of Robert Wise's The Haunting, whereas just you get to have those lingering effects of something just the uncanny of the uncanny. That's really what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Something we don't see as much anymore, but is throughout this film. Even big special effects sequences manage to have a feeling of the uncanny. I don't mean the uncanny valley, which is what we get today. It throws us out of the movie. This is the reverse, like the fact that the corpses at the end of this film are not reanimated. They're like crudely puppeteered from psychic energy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a great concept, and it visually just plays.
Yeah, when I was seeing everything stuck in the wall at first, I couldn't help but notice the cracks, and I was trying to discern if is he trying to open a portal? So our big bad of the movie is Karl Revarsovich, but he just goes by Ravar, who is apparently like a very powerful psychic with telekinetic abilities.
And psychic vampire.
Yeah, but it's sort of like he feeds off of the fear of people to use his telekinesis. And I'm thinking, okay, we got 6 girls in there, and did you drain them all at once? Was it like, were you just building up a stockpile? Because I don't think that they're all going to wait around for you while you bring more born bodies home. But you're going through a lot of effort just to stick things in the wall. Because he does this, and he does this in the mausoleum later in the movie, in the chapel. What is your end goal here? Are you practicing?
I took it more as he's not really able to control it completely. That like just it's emotional. It's like he kind of lashes out. That opening sequence though is the bodies of the girls is an incredibly effective visual because what it does is it sets up the stakes for the girls we're about to be like exactly, and it's done in a simple way. It's not a complex idea, but it's great because we're going to take a long time after that opening scene for there to be actual physical danger to anyone, right?
Yeah.
So you had to have something really stark. You had to set the stakes early, and the movie does it very efficiently, and it really lets the movie breathe after that. We can meet these characters. We can understand what they're doing. We can understand they're very distinct characters. Like you can't. They might not have a lot of depth, but they're very distinct, and they're allowed to have scenes.
Yeah.
Maybe the boyfriend is the weakest of the bunch. Okay, cool. But as you get to the end of the movie, it doesn't matter.
He's not. He's just there for the eye candy. He's not quite a hippo. But I don't understand. I was trying to figure out, is his last name Breaker? Because somebody on the basketball team calls him that twice, and I'm like, Is that his actual surname, or is that a nickname? Is it short for Heartbreaker or like Hyman Breaker? I'm
I don't
I
know.
don't,
I kind of assumed it was a sports thing that I wouldn't understand. Just let it go.
yeah, that's fair. I
As a
also really
sport
like.
illiterate, I don't know.
I don't know if you saw this on. Well, I watched this on Tubi, but there's just during the basketball practice scene. It's really brief, but the quality of the print just fucking dies. It just like falls off the edge of the cliff. And I mean,
Well,
not surprised.
it does too during the evening scene where Batman is listening to the tapes.
Oh yes, we didn't talk about Adam West. This very subdued Adam West. He's just kind of there, just doing his thing, and he's not over the top at all.
No,
And that's one of the reasons that Tom McLaughlin wanted to cast him, because he had that, he was getting typecast.
it's but so yeah. I mean, I think at the time a lot of these lower budgeted films were buying film stock as remainders from other productions as a way to cut costs because it was film stock at that point was very expensive. Today you could shoot as much as you want because it's digital and you just push erase if you don't need it. But at the time, film stock was a big deal. You couldn't be Kubrick, right? You couldn't just shoot 90 takes of something. That was your whole movie. You had to be very conservative. That's why they also would rehearse scenes, which is something they don't really do as much of now. But it adds. So if you wonder why performances looked a certain way before the digital age, well, it was handled much more like a stage play. There was, in a lot of cases anyway, there was rehearsals. Um, they would run through something several times before they actually ran the camera, and it adds another set of gravity and to films from that period. Whereas like the performances, the look of film grain, um, anomalies on the soundtrack, like a real change usually would have a pop or a change in the amount of hiss, and all that made a film feel like you were watching an artifact or a piece of art or a piece of a formatted narrative. I don't know exactly how to express it, but there was a very specific elevation that all that provided. I think digital looks clean, it looks crisp, it all looks pretty, and it has zero character.
Yeah, I'm in that boat too. I prefer something a little gritty, a little grainy, kind of shitty looking. Um, so after, we should also probably mention. So with those six dead girls, also our big bad villain, he's already dead. Which, again, I'm kind of just like, not that much of a threat, I guess. But he has like an evil heart attack because he's expended so much energy being evil by being a psychic vampire and absorbing all of these girls' fear from them so he could do his little parlor tricks or whatever. And I guess it just, his heart couldn't take it.
So it's interesting too, because you're right, like that he consumes so much that he almost transcends. Like flesh is not possible anymore, right? He can't remain on this coil. But
every time he kills, he transcends.
but he also, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of parallels to Hellraiser.
Okay.
In Hellraiser, Frank needs bodies and people brought to him so he can harness their energy to come back. Julia in the second film does the same thing. So there's a certain that's a more direct form of vampirism, I guess, if you're going to use those words. But it's just he got so evil that to get to the next level. Unfortunately for him, he needed to shed the skin. He had to become something beyond the flesh. Unfortunately, he's still trapped or psychically attached to his body, which I believe, the film never says it, but it seems like that's what he's trying to escape by consuming these girls in the mausoleum later.
I believe so. Since I think there was an alternate ending of this where, because he's trying to suck in our main character Julie, played by Meg Tilly, who's lovely in this, and she's so charming. But he's trying to use his evil gaze to pull her closer to him at the end, and she's hypnotized, so more or less. And I'm just thinking, and the alternate ending is where she has like a glow in her eyes to indicate that Raymar has possessed her, which, not gonna lie, that would have been kind of bitching if this was a thing that ended up being a franchise later. I wouldn't have hated it, but I don't know if I would want a sequel.
The problem with the sequels is it's called One Dark Knight.
That is fair, because then we'd have that would be it forever. It'd be 2 Dark Knights, 3 Dark Knights.
Yeah, One Dark Knight 2 doesn't work, right? As a title.
That's a good point.
But that's also the kind of funny thing too. Is like I'm glad that movies like this from this period didn't all get sequels and get remakes, and because this film just stands as it is, and people who find it will have, I think, a great time with one of the lesser known films of its era. But those who never do. They'll never know better. It's not like, oh, I'm missing the 4th film in that series. It's its own island. There's something more special about discovering that stuff.
Oh yeah. And it is a bit of a it's not exactly a slow burn. It definitely feels more like a teenage drama almost. After we get past the death of Raymar and his daughter Olivia, and then of course Al and Adam West, they're like, oh no, this is awful, whatever. But we go over and we're seeing Julie's story take place, where she's trying to get into this club called the Sisters with those fucking purple satin jackets, and I was not alive in '82. I was barely alive for most of the '80s. I don't know. Was that a thing?
So this movie does something that that other films and television series have done from time to time, called time mirroring, which is when you set it in your modern times, but you use another time period as all your cultural touchstones. So this, although it takes place in '82, reflects the late '50s really well.
Yeah.
So you get that Grease vibe, right? Mm-hmm. Like pretty clear. Yeah, so another example of something that does it that's really obvious is Twin Peaks, whereas Twin Peaks does exactly the same thing. Like, those kids in that high school could be right out of a 50s juvenile delinquents movie. But it's set in '89. And the reason I think it's compelling to do that is because it provides this kind of veneer of fantasy, so that modern kids don't have to look at it and say, I wouldn't do that. Because it feels like it's a different time period, even though it's set modernly.
Yeah.
There's limitations to it, but when it works, it really works. This movie treads pretty light on it, but yeah, like the click, there's nothing like that was going on in your nice suburban schools and wherever. Not just it wasn't happening, but even like kind of like the family dynamics feel like something from an earlier time.
Yeah. Also, especially just having to, again, this whole thing about where parents would be like, oh, they're over at so and so's house, cool, and then it's just whatever. They just peace out. Like, okay, you're over there, cool. Come back before curfew or whatever.
Come back not pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, like, Julie's trying to get into the Sisters, and there are already 3 other gals, and not exactly sure what the timeline is, but apparently she's been wanting to get into this clique. But and she's dating this guy named Steve, and Steve was previously dating the head of the Sisters, Carol. And
never good move.
I'd be like, that sounds fucking stupid, but I guess she really wants to be. I think that would just always be awkward though. So if you get initiated into the Sisters and get your purple satin jacket, Steve's gonna be around. You don't think that's gonna be a little awkward?
It's high school.
Yeah.
But so this actually dovetails really nicely into another one of my favorite films of this era, which is Hell Night. In that film is about rushing for a sorority and fraternity, and it's kind of the same thing, right? Go to a scary place and spend the night. So, and that film like takes being a ghost movie too. So I think there was something in the air about these type of movies, and I do think it kind of relates back to one of my things I think all of it always goes back to, which is the urban legends, like those simple morality stories that everyone told about vanishing hitchhikers, men with hooks on hands, and spider eggs in coat pockets. It's the idea of, oh well, if you're going to join a clique, they're going to make you do something. and it probably is a problem. It's like an anti-peer pressures
Yes.
morality story. So I think that all works. This doesn't go very hard in that, but it's there. It's available for you if you want.
I think that it came across pretty well when Julie and Steve were on the pier. And, Steve knows that Julie's not having fun trying to get initiated, and she's too proud to not go through with these initiations because she wants to prove herself to people that are never going to like her to begin with. And I thought that was
Yeah, well, with the girl that gnaws on a toothbrush when she's nervous is not going to have you. Maybe you want to evaluate some things.
oh man, I love the closing shot of this movie where you just see Kitty's dead hand next to the toothbrush, like it's some cautionary tale about obsessive oral hygiene. That's really what her downfall was.
Stuff like that I love, though. It's like those little quirky characters that you just don't see enough of. You don't see people given the kind of like their weirdness, and I like that. I like when weirdness is presented as fairly normal. Because, have you met me?
No, this is our first time.
Yeah, exactly.
I honestly though, it's like every time she's chewing on that toothbrush, I could just feel my gums receding. I'm like, please stop doing that, please, bad vibes. And Kitty and Carol are the ones that end up terrorizing Julie in the mausoleum. And I think I'm a little sad because it's like I thought Robin Evans who played Carol, she's very pretty and she plays a great mean bitch. She, definitely, but she didn't really do a lot of acting, and I think both of them didn't, stop doing that like in the late 80s. There are no more credits, past 1990 or so. And I'm just thinking, is it because that they had to film with like all those dead bodies? because the other gal, Leslie, who's played by E.G. Daily, that bitch is everywhere. She's had a huge career, and most people remember her as the voice of Tommy Pickles on Rugrats. But like weirdly, she also voiced Babe in Babe Pig in the City because like Christine Cavanaugh didn't take up that part because of the contract negotiations, and Christine Cavanaugh was Chucky on Rugrats. So it's a weird tie-in.
I think when we look at these horror movies from this period, and we see these actors and actresses, and we try and figure out what else they were in, we do research. What we don't realize is that, unlike most genres, horror has such an afterlife. There was a spate of On Golden Pond ripoffs that were released about this time. None of them are films that you're ever going to see. They're never going to pop up anywhere. Functionally, they're kind of lost films almost. They exist. They have no attention on them ever. No one talks about them. No one ever will. But the horror genre is resilient. Like you're in a horror film back in your youth, that's going to be something that's a lifelong commitment. So I think like actors come and go from the business for a lot of reasons, but we tend to see these people and want to see more from them because they are in a genre that has an afterlife. That's both good and bad for them, I think. Because unfortunately, if you were victim 7 in that movie with the guy with the white mask and the knife, then that's pretty much what you are for life. That I'm not sure that anyone's ever going to really roll the die on that much more for you. But on the other hand, at least you got that because most actors and actresses never even get that.
Yeah, I mean, at least some like you're going to get hit up by at least 1 or 2 horror conventions a year, even.
Yeah.
So,
I wish this movie would have a horror convention reunion.
Oh, that'd be kind of rad.
Yeah.
I would love that. So as far as, the dynamics between the sisters, honestly, like personally, I think Leslie's my favorite, E.G. Daly's character.
Yeah.
But I also get really Natasha Lyonne vibes off of her. If we were remaking this, that's Natasha Lyonne.
I think this is remake proof, though. Because they'd want to add so much crap to it. right?
I think we've already essentially, remade this. It's just in 1,000 different other movies because it's the same stuck in a haunted whatever trope.
Yeah, it's just,
Although this isn't a haunted house movie though.
it just feels like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say, like the fake haunting that the girls pull in the middle of the film, because of the music and the slow motion and how it's shot, gorgeous. Like
Oh yeah.
that is the horror genre right there in a single shot, because it's like it's the reason we all watch. It's you sit there and say that shouldn't scare me, and it doesn't scare you like on a deep level, but it's so effective. It's so cool,
Yeah.
and yet it's so old school and so classic. And
I think what I also really like about that is this really nice touch of Kitty, who's behind Julie when they're messing with her in the mausoleum, since they've made Julie have to spend the night there, and also gave her some Demerol. Whatever, it's cool.
It's not. It's like that was not even really part of the plan so much as like an added bonus that's on the spur of the moment gets added.
See, I feel like Julie pretty much had the right idea when she gets in that mausoleum. She finds this little secluded room. She gets a little candle. She's in an area with a sink in case she needs water or anything like that. Cool. And then she's got her sleeping bag.
Yeah, just go to sleep, man. Just
yeah,
get up in the morning and say you did it.
Exactly. Yeah. So she's during that haunting, Kitty is behind Julie and pulling this fake hand to make it look like the hand's moving on its own. But then you also have Carol, who's dressed up like a ghost but with a really bad rubber mask. And even Kitty gets kind of like spooked and keeps backing up and like has to put her hands over her eyes.
Because it manages that moment. The uncanny, again, is used in that moment. The uncanny is what horror films should go for. Remember when Stephen King gave that quote that people live and die by about first I try to terrify, and if I can't do that, then I try and horrify, and if I can't do that, I go for the gross out. It misses a big component, and that is the uncanny. Like the idea of something that outwardly is normal or transparent in its intent, but has just some almost intangible aspect that makes us question it. That's the uncanny, and it's the most powerful form of horror. And a moment like that, it's a fake scare. We know it's a fake scare, but because it goes on for as long as it does, and because it's done so fucking well, the uncanny sneaks in. It's something, again, we don't see enough of today. And when we do, it's something like Saint Maud. When the uncanny sneaks into a movie like that, it becomes a really powerful experience because it's so exotic at this point and rare. But we used to get it a lot, frankly. The fact that we want kind of action horror films today more than anything, that's what's popular, is why we don't have this anymore. And mind you, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have action horror films. I'm wearing a t-shirt of an action horror film that I like quite a lot. But I do miss films that had that extra wrinkle of making us just a little bit uncomfortable in ways that we can't really place.
Yeah, and I don't know if you would put this in the uncanny column, but it was still, that scene was still enough to kind of give me a little bit of a spook, even though it's, that it is just a fake scare. But the scene that kind of got me was the ending with with Raymar puppeteering all the other corpses in the mausoleum, and I think you can have a good idea of which ones are real and which ones are fake. And I kind of spoiled it for myself because I did read ahead with the trivia, and I already knew that some of those skeletons were real, but it still kind of gave me that feeling too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's also like a personal thing, like realizing, oh God, those actually used
that's
to
a
be
person.
yeah, exactly.
That's a person doing puppeteering right there.
So is that an uncanny column in your perspective?
Well, I mean, I didn't have when I saw the film originally. I didn't know anything about it, the production or anything. That was just not something you could even research. But the scene immediately preceding that, where the first tombstone cracks, and then the casket rolls slowly out.
Oh yeah,
and then tips down. That is uncanny. That is full bore, because what you're seeing is horrifying, but what you're not seeing is where your mind is racing. Like something is making that happen, and that's just it's really powerful stuff. It's really good stuff, and I don't mean like I think sometimes when I talk like this, people think that I'm trying to give it weight that it doesn't deserve. No, understand that this is all in the service of a great fun movie. It's not like it's saying something profound. As we said it up front, this movie's not profound. But what it is really effective and really fun, and it's also the perfect length for one of these things. It does not outlive its usefulness. It's pretty damn tight, but yet you do to get the time to know the characters, which is something we rarely get anymore. So I kind of think it's a perfect time capsule of a period in film history before the slasher boom, really, because even though this was released during, it was made before. It's kind of the perfect moment for the horror genre for me. It feels more like a 70s film than an 80s film to me.
A little bit, yeah. So, I gotta ask, why do you think Carol and Steve broke up?
Excuse me? Why do I think they broke up?
I want your theory.
So I think it's one of those things that, like, he's this jock that's obviously kind of a nice guy, and I think at some point he realizes that, like, he's probably not going to be a professional basketball player, right? So he's going to go to a regular life at some point, and she's not on that ride.
No.
And so there probably was a confrontation about that. Their paths are going to be very different, and it wasn't going to work out because I don't think like there was some traumatic event that broke them apart. I think it's just at some point the realization of this ain't right.
Yeah. Just okay. So I mean, that scene where Steve goes to Carol's house because he's upset that they've been torturing Julie with the initiations. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm just gonna make this assumption. She changes out of a t-shirt with no bra, with Perky's 80s tits, right?
Right.
She changes out of that because she sees him pull up. She changes out of that into a stiff, starchy blouse with a high collar and ruffles and pointy shoulders, and there's a fucking peplum. I feel like that has something to do with it. There is a huge disconnect.
That there's a very 2020s viewpoint on display there, I think.
I have a rational hatred for all of the things that are happening with that blouse, though. Peplums, high necks, or high collars, excuse me, and the pointy shoulders.
Well, listen. I know this isn't a popular viewpoint in the community, but yeah, the 80s sucked. Okay, the 80s sucked. The fashion, everything about it, it was a horrible time to be a human.
Peplums came back a few years back.
Well, that's because this nostalgia for a horrible time period. A lot of great shit got made in the 80s, sure, but a lot of great shit got made every decade. When the 90s started, I sighed a breath of. I was first of all, I graduated high school in '91. I was going on with my life. I was finally the adult I wanted to be. I never wanted to be a kid. Everything about the coming '90s was just amazing to me because we had escaped the awful specter of the 1980s.
So, as a dude, were there any like fashion trends that you absolutely hated because they were so ubiquitous at that time?
I don't know about ubiquitous, but I will say that the 70s and the 80s, which was my childhood and my adolescence, corduroy just wouldn't fucking die. And the 90s came and they're like, flannel's back, but no, the corduroy is a step too far. Fuck you.
I own a pair of fuchsia corduroy jeans.
I'm sorry about that. And no one is perfect. No one's holding you to a standard.
I love them, but they are too small for me. So, yeah.
It's all for the best.
It's also Texas, and that's something you can wear 3 days out of the year.
Corduroy is awful.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely owned too much corduroy growing up. You asked, so I mean. Oh.
So sweaty thinking about that. I just kind of like the texture.
Oh, see, that's exactly what I don't like. The ribbed texture of it, it's like you're living inside some kind of a horrible furry outfit.
This explains so much about my personality. Anyway, sorry for that tangent. So we've also, besides this main storyline of Julie being initiated by having to spend the night in the mausoleum, we've also got this other stuff going on with Raymar's daughter Olivia,
Yep.
and her sort of doing some more research into his life because they were estranged and he kept her away. And I guess we probably should have mentioned Dockstetter, who's perfect Andy Warhol. Oh my goodness. He shows up at the beginning of the movie standing outside the apartment like a total fucking weirdo. And he was the one that worked with he was World of the Occult writer, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And then he also knew about Raymar and that he was an actual psychic with telekinetic powers.
So this kind of character was really popular from basically the 1960s until, well, it still exists, but it used to be very popular, which is the pure exposition character. In Shocker, a film I do not like, there's exactly this character to explain. Oh, by the way, Horace Pinker was experimenting with electricity. Oh.
I almost think this works more because you have two parallel storylines. Part of the thing that I gripe about all the time with modern horror is like we always have to go solve a ghost story, go do research at the library, and
we're gonna do a web search to really piss me off. Yeah.
God, the web searches. Yeah, and it's always being, this stuff is being completed usually by our main character. But here we have somebody who's kind of, who's part of what's going on, but also removed from it. And they're not really emotionally invested in. So I think this works out better there.
It does. You can tell very much it wasn't very far into the careers of the filmmakers. I don't know if, by the time Jason Lives gets made, I don't think Tom McLaughlin or Hawes would have used a technique like this at that point in their career. But it's fairly inobtrusive here. But it also is because the performances, again, that period of film, the fashion of acting was in a different place, and it sells better. I'm cool with it. I mean, I won't lie to you. If it was all cut, I probably wouldn't care because I love all the stuff in the mausoleum is what I care about.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's also one of those things though, whereas you can clearly see a lot of blocks of filmmaking. You can see that very very much they shot segments of the film in locations, and then they went somewhere else, and they never went back. Right? You can definitely tell that certain actors never saw each other on this production. So
I never really thought about that part.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay.
There's in the theater, and I'll remember this. I might have been young, but I'll never let this go. When the boyfriend pulls up to the mausoleum on the motorcycle, like people were shouting out like the Superman theme and like because it's that the boys come to save the day moment, which again would never happen today. That would never be allowed to happen. But the fact that he doesn't really do much.
He doesn't do shit.
No.
He does jack all of shit. Like he tries to, he meets up with Julie, and
they run around.
All freaked out. He's trying to calm her down, and then Raymar at this point is fully awakened because he's scared all three of the girls so that he can power up, and then he just further absorbs that by puppeteering those corpses, and then sending them after Kitty and Carol, which is just further amplifying their fear. And I like that idea in theory. I think, it makes sense. My issue with Raymar's powers is I need to know what his end game is not well defined, and he just wants to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, and actually literally.
Yeah.
And Dockstetter's talking about the previous experiments, how he experimented on lab animals, I'm just like, I want to, like, okay, what can you do if you absorb like a mouse? Can you make something kind of?
We could ask a cat.
Hmm?
We could ask a cat for the answer to that.
I feel like the cats would be like, I'm not ready.
No, I'm saying that if you ask what do you get if you absorb a cat, a mouse, I think a cat probably answers that, understands that question better than we do.
Yeah, but you're converting it into telekinetic energy. Like what? How? Like a mouse is not really going to be enough.
I think this is meant as very much. Again, the urban legend is there. Probably a little bit of English ghost story in there. It's not really well defined. Does he want to take over the world? I don't know. I don't see any evidence of that. And does he just want to survive death in some way? Maybe. I don't know. I do love the fact that we don't have a villain speech.
Yeah,
I'd prefer that than I'd prefer not to know in a way. But again, it's a beautiful short film, so it doesn't belabor anything, and it is very much from Julie's point of view, right? The stuff that's not is such a side story; it's not worth talking about, really, almost. But it's from her point of view. She would not have that information, so we don't have that information. I'm kind of cool with it.
Yeah, I just like seeing everything play out.
I think listening to all the recordings and it is interesting because that also reflects Fulci's House by the Cemetery, which came out the year before, which uses a very similar technique to very similar ends. I think the Fulci film is slightly stronger with that, which is odd because it's dubbed. You'd expect it not to be, but again, there's certain things in the horror zeitgeist at a time, right? I think it's smart. Also, you got to remember that this is the early 1980s, so things like the Amityville Horror were very much on people's minds still. So, like the idea of the paranormal in the real world in suburbia affecting people today, not in a castle in England 200 years ago. But this does the haunted house thing in a mausoleum, right?
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of tropes being developed in films like this that now we look back and go, oh, well, that's well worn, but it wasn't really then. You're really only talking about, The Shining had come out 2 years earlier, right?
Yeah.
So like a lot of what we consider like, I don't know, cliche was being invented on films like this. So that might cloud vision a little bit. But I think Raymar is a great villain because I love the idea of a villain that's barely in a film.
Yep. And I was waiting to see what he looked like. That actually did keep me anticipating the third act because I was very curious. And I do like the fact that he's just a corpse standing up in his coffin with lightning shooting out of his eyes, and then there's this weird purple glow from his powers? Question mark. I mean, like, look, if I could do mood lighting like that, I would also if I had evil powers.
Oh, absolutely. So this movie also is kind of one of the things it affected pop culture with is that it was the film that John Landis used as a heavy touchstone for the Thriller music video.
Really?
Yeah, if you compare the two, you'll see in look up some specific corpses, for instance. So it managed to affect a wider audience than probably ever showed up to see it in the movie theater.
Yeah.
And it definitely affects. I will tell you what. Again, if you look at the zombies in Dawn of the Dead, and then you compare the dead people in this, they're not zombies. But these are far more effective.
Yeah. And what I really appreciate is that they are literally just moving along. Like I was waiting, when they started being puppeteered, I was thinking, okay, please just let them move like super quick, on a skateboard, like it's House on Haunted Hill. Give me that, and I got it a lot. So that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And there is still something very creepy about that. like not having control over your body, even if you are dead. I mean, we see Raymar do that with Julie too when he
Yep.
pulls her
He
towards
pulls her in. He creates that gravity.
Yeah, her feet are just kind of like in there.
Yeah, and those shots of his eyes. The thing is, I almost wish the lightning hadn't been added with that optical. It's a good effect. It doesn't look shitty, but
Maybe
because
sparingly.
it feels to me like the Christopher Lee version of Dracula, because we'd always get those shots of his blood-stained eyes, and then the women would be like, let's go see what's happening over there. So it was kind of tickling all those sweet spots for me too. So, but I mean, I don't hate the lightning. It's just I think they could have done something a little bit different that would have emphasized one of the influences, which I think is pretty obvious.
So, okay, we got to talk about how Raymar dies. I mean, I feel like most of the budget was saved just for the special effects used for his re-death. I guess that's what we're calling it. So apparently, his daughter, it's mentioned earlier in the movie that psychic abilities can be passed down, which I guess I don't know what gene that works on, but okay. And that's why she has some moments of she has that moment of clairvoyance in the beginning, and then she's also able to psychically view the girls in the mausoleum, and that's how she knows to go to the mausoleum. So she shows up, and I mean, she's almost immediately knocked down, and I love the sound effect. It sounds legitimately like a laser gun from the lightning shooting out of Raymar's eyes. And of course, we have to get back up on her feet at some time, and she just takes her compact and holds it up to his face.
Shoot that shit right back in.
I mean, okay, now this is why I'm just, I'm not that. I couldn't really take Raymar seriously anyway, and this kind of, really just took it down a few pegs as far as him being a serious villain. Reflection killed you, and yes, I know. Freddy goes by his own reflection as well. I have issues with that ending too, but whatever.
Well,
I just feel like you should be able to break a mirror. You've absorbed so many people's energy that you were able to puppeteer an army of corpses. You were able to break them out of the mausoleum walls, but you got taken out.
So I mean, again, I promised I wouldn't get deep on this movie because it's not a deep movie. I think the mirror is very symbolic, though. I think the idea of him facing his daughter is like seeing himself in her kind of thing, and the mirror is just kind of a conduit to that. So it's like really her presence that really actually is all that it needs to cast him down. But I mean, yeah, I'm not going to claim that this has the strongest villain ending of all time, but it honestly, it's kind of a Raiders of the Lost Ark type of moment.
Oh yeah.
So, if you love this time period in film, you're probably going to be fine with all of it. Like, whatever complaints you have, you'll have too much of a thrill from a movie that looks like a real movie. Even if it is a low-budget film, it looks like a real movie. Unlike, so much that looks today like, I don't know, someone got a camcorder and just started reeling. I don't know. Or worse, a film that was made in a computer.
I was halfway
This doesn't look like it was made in a computer.
Oh, no, absolutely not. It kind of reminds me a little bit of, I mean, it's like a more extreme version of Are You Afraid of the Dark for me. That's how I felt. But I almost was expecting I was almost expecting his daughter Olivia to show up and just have a full out psychic fight, because it's sort of it was hard to kind of tell where they were going to be able to draft this.
That would lead to the problem of, and I'm sorry to do this, but kind of the last Star Wars trilogy, whereas Rey just discovers, hey, I'm going on this adventure, and she's able to outfight people that are trained and super powerful immediately. So you don't want that problem. Maybe they wrote themselves a little bit of a corner, but by the same rate, by then you got what you needed out of the movie. The girls and our power couple getting chased around by the puppeteered corpses is what you paid them for the ticket for, and you get that. This is a movie that actually delivers its promise, and that's another thing that I think, unfortunately, is kind of lost today. Now that you can put anything on screen, what promise can you possibly make that's going to feel fulfilled to your audience? And the answer is not much. You know,
You have so many choices, you can't make one that makes sense.
you can't do one thing right because you can do 70 things. So do all 70. Maybe something works for someone. That's how you will wind up with like chaotic screen garbage like the Ant-Man movie, right?
Which one?
The most recent thing, the thing I didn't see and will never see.
I didn't see one.
Saw the trailer and I said, that looks like the most busy vomit I've ever seen on a film ever.
I think was it the whole like the pile of Ant-Men or Kings? I forget. Was it the pile of Kings or the pile of Ant-Men?
All I saw was a lot going on screen at all times, and I was like, don't they trust any image to be powerful enough to not be like burdened with all this other crap?
Nope, they don't.
It's kind of like the difference between like when you hear Black Sabbath and you realize a heavy bass line is enough to get you into metal, and then you hear like some of those European death metal bands and they're going so far out of their way. You know, we're the evilest thing ever. It's like did it. That's it. That's all you needed. So,
yeah,
I like the simplicity of this film a lot. I like its personality. I like that it cares about its characters, even if they're not the deepest characters. I love that it trusts the performances. I love that it uses some humor in the proper way that you use gallows humor, not to dissolve tension, but rather to allow a transition to a different type of scene so you can build up pressure again. I like the look of the film, whereas it looks a little too dark and a little too shadowy and a little too purple and a little too mausoleum-y, right? I think that this just is a real movie in a sea of I don't know, but it wasn't even digital that did it, because honestly, by the end of the 80s, they don't feel like real movies anymore to me very often anyway. And then when you get to the 90s and you get to stuff like Independence Day, it was done. I mean, once you got to the Mummy films with the Brendan Fraser Mummy, there's no turning back on the just unreality of cinema. And today they Disney releases quote live action remakes that have nothing live action in them. It's all computer generated, so it's basically a cartoon still, right? But that's the kind of trajectory, and this movie's kind of the antidote to that because it predates all of it. And I think if they had those tools available to them when they made this film, they still wouldn't have used them. Because I think this is the film they wanted to make, and they made it, and that's beautiful.
Oh yeah, I think my favorite. Well, I don't know if it's my favorite scene, but one of the scenes that like really stuck with me because it was gross and it kind of made me squirm was when Kitty Carroll getting attacked by all the corpses, and Kitty like is trying to push one away from her, but her arm goes into the torso, and I was like, oh god, I'm gonna do it. Right. Yeah, it was. Oh man, that was good.
And the boyfriend tries to punch one, and it's like he disallows the jaw, but it still keeps coming.
Yeah.
Also,
I love that one. The one corpse with that gorgeous head of black hair. Oh my god.
But I mean, what a freaking horrible way to die, to smother under dead corpses.
I know.
I mean that's far nastier way to go than anything you saw in a slasher film, right?
I mean, I'm guessing that they probably died of heart attacks. They probably died of fright, you know.
Well, in that circumstance, no matter how you go out, whatever vital organ fails, you're probably it's probably just the worst way to go.
Yep. Well, I think that we've pretty much come to the end of the movie. But are there any other parts of it that you really think that everyone should know about?
To be honest with you, the reason I chose this movie wasn't to showcase a film that I think is going to appeal to everyone on some deep level, that they're going to find something that's their new favorite film. That wasn't it. It's that these little movies from this time period just feel like they have the whole point of cinema to me in them. Like, the reason we love this stuff is because they can make you feel stuff. And this makes me feel stuff. A lot of stuff. Some of it's nostalgia, sure. But I'm able to connect with a movie like this on a level that I just have trouble modernly. And I wish more people would find these little movies, not the big stuff from the time period. We've all seen Jaws a million times. Jaws is a great film. Give Jaws a break. Give Halloween a break. Give Friday the 13th a break. Check out One Dark Night. That's it.
Yeah.
Because I think you'll have a lot more fun on a first watch of this than you will on a 14th view of any of those other films.
And it's pretty easy to find. I mean, it's on Tubi for free, but it's also, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube for free as well. And it's kind of a nice way to just take a break in the day. You know, you need to kill some time to just sit down with this.
The one thing I did want to discuss, and I made reference to it, was, does this feel like a PG movie to you?
Yes, actually it does.
It does?
It does feel like a PG movie.
Wow.
No? What do you think?
I don't see it.
Are you seeing G? What?
No.
Okay.
It's too gross. It's just too gross for. Remember that Gremlins exploding Gremlins in the microwave and Temple of Doom's heart rip out made the PG-13 exist.
Yeah.
Well, there's grosser stuff in this movie by far than either of those things.
I'm guessing it was PG because there's no blood, right? I mean, is there much in the way of swearing? I don't remember much.
Well, there's nothing extreme as far as swearing, but I don't know. It's just the tone is dark. This doesn't feel like a kids movie to me. It feels too dark to be a proper kids movie. Whereas you'd be like, let's bring the 9-year-old. Although, how old was I? But it doesn't feel like it. To me, this feels like it's trapped in that limbo between. It feels like it's trapped in the limbo between PG-13 and R somewhere. I mean, this is a bleak ending. This movie has a dark ending.
Yeah, I mean, those girls are dead.
In a horrible, horrible way. And we just saw a lot of dead people.
I don't know. Maybe I'm becoming desensitized, which is just, it's gross and unnerving. But for me, I don't see it pushing a PG-13.
Okay.
But, yeah.
I wouldn't change anything about it either to push a rating anyway, so it exists as it is, and I think it's a great book. I don't know that if you're going to introduce a kid to horror, and I'm talking like a 10-year-old, I think this wouldn't be like where you comfortably would go, and that's kind of PG to me, right? That's where maybe you do go with Poltergeist, or maybe you go with something Wicked This Way Comes, or something like that.
I would not. I think honestly, like Poltergeist still scares me personally. I wouldn't let a 10-year-old watch. You know, if I was a parent, which I'm not. If I were, I would probably hesitate to let a 10-year-old watch Poltergeist because there's some stuff in there that's going to scar them. You know, the kids are constantly in danger. One of them gets sucked into another dimension. The other one almost gets eaten by a tree and strangled by a clown. I guess that's where I make my judgment there.
You see, this is the reason why I am not and should never be a parent, because I'm kind of like, let's find out what'll happen.
So, and I mean, like, I do agree. This probably, I think a 10-year-old may not actually be that interested in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's true too, because there's not a clown doll that's going to be an easy reference point, right?
Yeah, I mean, they can't really relate to everything that's happening in high school.
No.
You know, I mean, maybe later on, sure. I don't, but it's interesting. You know, this is probably a movie that if you're in high school, you'll go and see it, and you might memory dump it later because it's not as extreme as you would hope for. So it's kind of a weird in-between area. So, okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from with more of a PG-15 rating, maybe.
It's going to go to the British rating system for this movie.
Right.
The U.S. system doesn't quite cut it. They were saying, well, I don't know if it should have gotten a 15. And you're like, what the hell are they talking about?
But yeah, no, I definitely recommend that people go ahead and check it out, for sure. Lorne, you got anything you want to pimp out?
I don't know. Did anything happen this year? No, not this year. Yeah, so you should buy this.
Buy my book. Buy my book.
Because books, I don't know. Books are better than life, to be honest. So you should definitely buy my book. Check out Visited by Voices 1 on the YouTube, where you'll see lots of familiar faces. And if you're not familiar with the faces you see, you should become familiar with them all. And you can follow me on Twitter at Lorne Dixon, and that's Dixon with an X, not a CK. And that's it. I'm out there.
Yeah, and the book is super fucking weird. So if you want something that's going to keep you guessing and you're not really going to understand what direction it's going, definitely for you. But yeah, wow, it's been wild, bringing this thing back to life, so to speak. But I'm pretty excited. And, again, thank you so much for coming on, because it really does mean a lot to me, especially with being able to be part of Visited by Voices and also Region Free, since you are the Grand Poobah of Region Free Season 3.
I'm just an organizational principal in flesh. That's it.
Poobah.
No Poobah.
Anyway, so socials are down in the description below, and also if you want to be on the show to discuss something, you can hit me up at one of those channels. But until next time, watch for falling animals. Oh, I forgot to play the outro. Fuck.
There it is.
I'm rusty, okay?
That's what happens when she gets rained on.
I've got a little bit of rain. I'm waiting just for the 15 seconds to get so I can continue recording with the stream. What a great return.